Sorry. Whoa.
Good morning, everyone. The movie starts with a nurse named Claire. She has a friend named Serena, who is a professional dancer. Claire leaves her apartment to work, and before leaving, Serena reminds Claire of her show that will take place at night. At the hospital, Claire brings a bouquet of flowers to one of the patients named Sam Wilson, who is in a bad mood because he's suffering, and Claire can only give him painkillers after the test results appear, and Claire promises to tell him the test results as soon as they appear, but Sam gets angry and gets rid of the flowers she brought him. In the next scene, it seems that some nurses don't like Claire's presence because they hate nurses who work as hard as she does. During lunch, Claire quickly eats her food and then meets her next patient named Peyton. Claire sees her dance shoes, and the patient tells her that she misses the dance. At the end of the shift, Claire is getting ready to change to leave the hospital, but is surprised by the entrance of her boss Lana, who asks her to clean one of the patient's rooms. Claire protests and tells the boss that she is done with her work, but Lana threatens her with a bad report about her, and Claire returns to work fearful for her work. At night, and after completing the work, Claire runs quickly to attend the presentation of her friend Serena, then enters the elevator and finds inside a worker in charge of the food cart. As the elevator was about to close, a man named Luke also enters, and suddenly, the electricity cuts off. The server panics and Claire tries to calm him down. Luke tries to push the emergency button, and everyone spends their time in the elevator during the blackout. Luke asks Claire why she is in the elevator so late at night. Claire talks to her about her friend Serena's show. Then she asks him the same question, and Luke answers him by saying that he received a free ticket from his boss to come to the show. The cleaner starts putting the elevator back to work while Luke and Claire discuss a lot of things, and Luke admits he is happy to be stuck in the elevator with Claire and expresses his desire to see her again. As the two were trying to get out of the elevator, Luke turns around to look at Claire's face, but she was busy collecting her things, and after getting out of the elevator, Claire sees Luke shaking Dr. Frederick's hand. Then Serena comes running and takes her with her. Later, Claire asks Serena to sign the card of her patient Peyton, and she tells him about Luke, whom she met in the elevator, and that she knows nothing about him except his name. The next day at the hospital, Dr. Frederick introduces the new Dr. Luke to all the staff. Claire recognizes him immediately, and then Dr. Frederick asks them to introduce himself to Luke. Claire thought he would recognize her by introducing himself, but he can't. Then she looks a little upset but doesn't let him affect his work. After that, Claire goes to Peyton's room and gives her the card signed by her friend Serena. In the next scene, it looks like the nurses are starting to get closer to Luke, but he's trying to avoid them, and when Claire comes to talk to her, Luke couldn't recognize her because he didn't see her face in the elevator and thinks she came only to flirt with him, and then gets angry and yells out that he only came to help the patients. After that, Serena comes to Claire's house and she tells her that Luke ignored her when she was talking to her in the hospital. Serena asks her if Luke saw her face because they were in the dark in the elevator. At the hospital, Dr. Frederick questions Luke about his first day in the hospital, then tells him that a patient named Godfrey is the main donor in the hospital and asks him to look after her. Luke keeps his things in his locker, and suddenly his wallet falls to the ground, and when he opens it, he finds the ticket to the dance performance, and in the meantime remembers the girl he met in the elevator. In the next scene, Claire has lunch with her boyfriend Starley, who asks her to apply for the position of head nurse because he thinks that she deserves this position. Claire tells her that she filled out the application and submitted it, and suddenly, Luke comes and greets Claire and apologizes to her for her behavior with her. Then the two share a friendly conversation. In the next scene, Whitney and Lana find out that Claire applied for the position of chief nurse. Lana confirms that she won't allow her to take the position and plans to torture Claire into resigning on her own. Claire finishes her work, and when she was about to eat, Lana comes and asks her to do a new task, which is to take a sample from Sam Wilson, who gets very angry. Lana seems happy to see Claire in this difficult situation, and suddenly, Dr. Luke and Dr. Frederick pass by Lana, who takes the opportunity to tell them that Claire has a terrible and frightening style of dealing with patients. When Claire was about to leave, Lana called him and prevented him from leaving because she needed her services during the night shift. Claire tries to prepare Mrs. Godfrey, and suddenly Luke comes into the room to talk to Mrs. Godfrey and tells her that her condition has started to deteriorate, but Mrs. Godfrey tells her that she has lived a happy and long life and then praises Claire for her wonderful work in the hospital. Claire, who is embarrassed, leaves the room under the pretext of filling a bottle of water. Ms. Godfrey advises Luke that when he finds a special person, he should not let it slip from his hands. The next day, Luke goes to the center of the Capitol and tells the receptionist that he is looking for a woman's identity and asks her for help in getting a list of the names of the women who came to the dance show to find out the identity of the woman who was with him in the elevator that night, but the receptionist refuses and apologizes to him. In the next scene in the hospital, Godfrey asks Luke the day he tries to find a woman who loves him and tells her about Claire while Luke tries to ignore her and asks her to look for suggested treatments. Later, Luke finds Claire in the cafeteria and talks to her about her deal with Mrs. Godfrey in search of a life partner. Claire accepts and the two will have lunch together. Luke has the idea of discovering the identity of the woman who was in the elevator, then goes back to the center looking for the server that was in the elevator with him. Meanwhile, Claire heals Mr. Sam, who makes a fuss by choosing what he would like to eat on the menu. At lunch, Claire sees Luke sitting alone and asks him if he's okay, but he doesn't want to explain why he was upset, and in the end, Luke tells Claire that he remembered one of the patients at the hospital where he worked earlier, because he was paralyzed because of Luke's bad decision to treat him, and although no one blames him for his decision, but he still feels guilty. After that, Claire tells Serena that she has become a fan of Luke and asks him for advice. In the hospital, infection spreads for Peyton. Luke asks Claire to put him more antibiotics. After that, Claire meets her boyfriend Stanley, but Lana interrupts them and tells them that there is a fundraiser to organize and asks Claire to stay in the hospital. Claire brings balloons to Mr. Sam Wilson and is surprised by his reaction as he did not yell at him for the first time. As Claire prepared to leave, Luke arrived and they went together to buy a gift for Peyton, but he received an emergency call from Peyton's mother and returned to the hospital. The next day, Claire sees Peyton's mother in the hospital crying, then rushes into Peyton's room and finds her healthy. Peyton tells her that Dr. Luke improved her condition last night. Meanwhile, Luke tries to find the waiter who was in the elevator, where he tries to compose a story to convince the center to get the list of women. In the next scene, Claire notices red spots on Mr. Sam Wilson's leg and tries to tell Luke, who leaves in a hurry after receiving a call from the waiter. He received no useful information from him, except to say that one of the dancers presented a ticket to the dance performance to the woman who was in the elevator with them, and of course, the waiter means Claire, Serena's friend, without knowing it. The next day, Lana sees Luke with Claire walking. Luke takes Claire home and shows Claire her paintings and asks her to try to paint, and they spend a good time finishing paintings together, and when Claire tried to get closer to him, Luke turns away from her and tells her that he loves another girl and he wants to say the girl he saw in the elevator without realizing that it's Claire. She leaves disappointed. The next day, Luke goes back to the center and asks the dancers the identity of the girl who was in the elevator on the night of the dance show, but no one knows what he is talking about that day. Serena arrives late for rehearsals. At the hospital, Claire was in Mrs. Godfrey's room and suddenly Luke goes in and apologizes and leaves after seeing Claire in the room. Mrs. Godfrey asks Claire what is going on between them. Claire tells her that Luke is in love with another woman. Then Mrs. Godfrey tells her that she knows that Lana is abusing her. After that, Mrs. Godfrey plans with Sam, Jonathan, and Peyton to send Claire to a fundraiser at night, but Claire refuses to leave the patients unattended. Then Stanley steps in and tells him that he will make up for his place at work and tells him that Luke was looking for a girl who was with him in the elevator when he went to the dance show. Claire agrees to go to the party. At the party, Claire comes and sees Luke, who is surprised to see her and then apologizes to her for her behavior the day Claire tried to get closer to him but tells him she understands why he is confused. As Claire is about to admit her feelings for Luke, Lana interrupts and insults her and calls her an opportunist because she thinks she is using Luke to get to the position of chief nurse. Luke is annoyed by Lana's words and believes that her words are true and asks Claire to leave the scene and go and take care of the sick instead of staying with him. Claire leaves embarrassed and returns to his apartment. Serena finds Claire in the apartment in tears and then tells her that she has to defend herself and take risks. At the hospital, Claire visits Peyton to say goodbye and then goes to collect her things. Lana comes to mock her, and while Claire was about to leave, everyone looks at her and Luke does nothing to help her. Luke visits Mrs. Godfrey, who is disappointed by the deterioration of things between him and Claire. Mr. Sam asks questions about Claire, and when he learns that she has left, he gets very angry because of the bad opinion towards people, and Dr. Frederick realizes that his words are true, and after that, Dr. Frederick sends a letter to Claire asking him to talk to her. In the next scene, Luke sees the card of the show with Peyton and asks her how she got the card. Peyton tells her that Claire was the one who gave it to her and also tells her that Claire could not enjoy the dance show because she stayed in the elevator that was malfunctioning, and at that moment, Luke realizes his mistake and calls Claire, who does not answer. Luke sends Claire a painting and asks her to meet her, and despite her anger against him, Claire decides to meet him. When he sees Claire in front of him, Luke describes himself as blind and selfish and apologizes to her for not standing next to her and tells her that he was inspired by the painting of her while the light showed her when she was with him in the dark elevator, and also tells him that he didn't realize that his mysterious lover was Claire, and adds that he is the stupidest man in the world because he was looking for Claire and she is actually in front of his eyes. Claire forgives Luke because she loves him and then goes back to work as head nurse. Everyone was happy to have him except Lana and Whitney, and at the end of the film, Claire and Luke get closer and closer as the days go by.